I'm going to invite Lisanne McNew, NAWB Board Chair, to come onto the stage and join me for a conversation involving defense communities and the possibility of relationship, partnership for a shared end game of helping individuals in defense communities to be able to find employment. So I'm going to turn the stage over now to our Board Chair, Lisanne McNew. Lisanne?
Please welcome to the stage Lisanne McNew and Tim Ford.
Right? Yeah, that's right. All right. Well, good morning. I didn't come out and dance today like I did yesterday. Yesterday I came out and did a little dance.
I wasn't gonna be ready to dance.
See, I forgot to tell you that backstage. You were supposed to dance, so I'm gonna give you that water here.
Cool.
All right. Well, good morning and welcome. So excited to have you. So as the voice of God, I think, said, we have. I love that, right? I love
exactly.
being introduced like that. So Tim Ford, the CEO for ADC, or the Association of Defense Communities, with us today, and just really excited to have you with us. There is so much going on, obviously, which was kind of just mentioned in the last session, so much going on around the country, and really all of us are from defense communities. And so what's really interesting is that you guys actually have your own forum or conference going on across town right now. Many of our colleagues are over there. I know I'll be over there speaking tomorrow as well. And so just excited that you're with us today. So can you start off by telling us what is ADC? Sure. What do you guys do? When did you guys get started? And then we'll jump in.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for the chance to come to this conference. I sort of worked in the workforce world. It's at one point been to this conference many years ago. And I want to just say how much I appreciate what workforce boards do. I've seen it in action at the local level, and what the work you do is so important. And what you've done to sort of build the connection between what we do at defense communities and what you do at the workforce boards is important. And so I want to thank you for your leadership in doing that. But a little about ADC. We are actually celebrating our 50th anniversary next year. Wow. We got started in the 1970s when DoD was starting to close military bases. This is before the word BRAC was even something used. Basically, DoD would announce they're closing a base, and the community would find out, and then the community had to figure out what they were going to do to basically recover from that. We were actually created by DoD. They knew they needed sort of a partner in the nonprofit side to work with them, and they helped get us started 50 years ago. So a lot of our history through the 70s and 80s was helping communities through downsizing, through all the BRAC rounds and helping engage communities and figure out the really tough challenge when you have a base close or you have a base realigned. In the in the early 2000s, we started to evolve because I think communities started to realize that you couldn't just engage when there was a BRAC. And that's sort of what happened. You probably know in Colorado Springs, people would pop up as soon as they're BRAC, and then when there wasn't a BRAC, they would, go away. I think when we hit BRAC 2005, this is the 20th anniversary of that, communities said, hey, we got to keep at this and be partners with the military. And so a lot of what's happened in our world over the last 2 decades is creating these partnerships between communities and the military to support their mission. And it's another whole broad conversation about partnerships. I know you know a lot about that, but that's really at the root of what we're doing. And what our mission is really creating one community between the base and the military presence and the community. So we have 300 communities, regions, and states who are part of ADC. And what they're focused on is bringing across the message that national security starts at home. So that is really fundamental to what we do. This isn't just about goodwill and cheering on the military. We're part of their mission. We're part of supporting what they do every day because their service members live in our communities, our infrastructure is connected, our workforce is connected. So this idea of being one community is really fundamental to who we are.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why I thought it was such a great conversation today because, you mentioned 300 communities, NAWB represents almost 600 local and state workforce boards. And so, how can we work together more? So as I mentioned, and we heard from the last panel, there's a lot of things going on in the country, and a lot of challenges that face communities, defense communities. So whether it's childcare, healthcare, workforce, all of those things. What are you seeing is some of the biggest things facing defense communities right now? And I know that's a very big question.
I think your point is we share the same challenges. I mean, a defense community is a community.
Yeah.
I think that when we deal with the challenges of housing or childcare in a community with a major military presence, you just have a different spin to it. There's complexities because you're involving DoD, and if anyone knows the Department of Defense, there's always complexities when we're dealing with DoD. So funding sources can be different. Just the fact that our communities end up being places where people are moving in and out of constantly, that's a big issue and has a lot of ramifications on sort of how workforce is handled. So I think the same issues that this group and what you think about are important to us. But I would say right now, and if you would jump over the river to our conference, this is different for us. I mean, the biggest issue that our folks are talking about is the threats that we're facing right now as a country. And we have a lot of generals come to our conference, and I will say generals are not partisan individuals. They are war fighters. They know what they're talking about, and I listen to them. And every single one talks about the same thing, and that is a deep, deep concern that we are going to be facing conflict with China at some point, and in some level. And we have sort of lived in this environment that our homeland is a sanctuary. So we've always thought that it's not something that we have to think about. And even through the different wars we've all been part of and witnessed, it's always been far, far away. But what we're talking about now could bring conflict to our homeland. And I think that's something really important for everyone to understand because it's significantly different than what we've talked about in the past. And, I think that, what are the ramifications of that? Like, what's the reality? I mean, we talk about threats of, your power grid maybe going down, and not just for a day, but for a month. And, having, entire parts of your economy potentially impacted by that. So there's a big threat out there, and I think that's really part of what our conversation is right now. And it's a scary conversation. We have a slide, we're doing some instant polling, I'm sure you guys do that, and one of the slides is, what are your biggest concerns right now? And the choices were things like power grid going down, missile strikes, drones. I mean, these are the real things that communities are thinking about and that we could be facing in the near future. So I don't talk about this to scare people. I think it's an awareness level that we're heading into a different period, and that's going to have broad ramifications of how our military operates and how our national security is protected.
Man, I feel like we should have had this conversation after a couple drinks.
I know.
And
it's
not
a downer, and I'm
and
sorry.
not at 9:45 in the morning. I only had half a cup of coffee. Jeez, all right. No, but
Yeah.
I appreciate you being candid with us, right? Because sometimes I think that doesn't always happen. And as you mentioned, that's happening across the river at your conference and stuff like that. So, one of the things, though, is as we look at these possible threats, especially in the communities, is making sure that the warfighter is ready. Where part of that is making sure that their family is ready, right? And I think that's where the workforce comes into play, right? Making sure that their family has a job, the spouses, and those sorts of things. And so, I think for those of us here, which, as I mentioned, there's a lot of executive directors, we have board members, we have chairs and things like that. How can we better help the defense communities, the military, from what you see? Or have you seen some really great communities out there or different practices and some things that we can kind of take away, especially right now when things maybe are a little bit different than what we've seen in the recent
Yeah,
past.
I mean, we don't know what is going to happen next. This isn't like we have a play, the play card for this exactly. So I think we talk about home front readiness.
Yeah.
So it's thinking about how do you be ready as a community for things that could happen. So and that's one thing I know that the workforce system is very good at responding to things that happen, surprises, whether it be COVID, whether it be a natural disaster. So sort of diving into that ability to be responsive and working with your community so you understand what those threats are. And I will say this isn't just limited to those communities with military bases. I think there's a concern that military-based communities are most likely bullseyes for this type of risk, just the fact that the military's there, but we could see this anywhere around the country. So I think the number one thing right now is awareness. I think it's being ready as a workforce system to react and think creatively when challenges are hit. And thinking, there's a lot of communities starting to go through scenario planning. You're like, what if this happens? What happens when our power grid goes down? And again, not for a day, but for a month. And what are the implications in your community? We saw that somewhat during COVID when you sort of shock the economy. That can have long-term ramifications, but there's lessons we can learn. So I think at this point it's being prepared, being aware, and I think just understanding that we're moving into a different environment. And that just means that we all have to stay educated and up to date.
Okay. I have one of the questions that I kind of mentioned before, and then I'm going to ask a different question that you don't know about. So I always like to do that because I just thought about it just now. That's why I always bring a pen. So a lot of defense communities include Guard and reserves and those sorts of things who live locally while obviously serving part-time, which is interesting. So how are those communities adapting to the workforce efforts to better support them? And have you seen some communities that are really doing a great job? And really that goes to kind of what you're talking about as we kind of shift and those sorts of things with everything.
Well,
going on.
I think it's an important question because I think often we don't think about our Guard and Reserve. And defense communities do an amazing job supporting Guard and Reserve. Mm-hmm. I mean, because we're used to it. It's what we do. It's sort of in our blood to provide that network of support. But remember, most Guard and Reserve are probably not sitting in a defense community. They're sitting in communities across the country. So you mentioned this. Every community needs to be a defense community in some respect because you have Guard and Reserve who are living there, and you need to be thinking about how do you support them. So employer education. I mean, it has to be a constant thing. I mean, I'm always surprised at how quickly employers forget or don't understand what Guard and Reserve is like. And especially if we could be moving into a period of deployments, that creates more challenges for employers. We haven't had as much, but that could be ramping up pretty quickly. I think the other thing that if you're not in a defense community per se, but you have Guard and Reserve, is trying to think about building that connection to the military. And this is one of the things we've lost as a country, partly because we've closed so many bases. We have entire states now that really have no military presence. And so communities and states and regions lose this sort of tangible connection to the military and service. So the more you can highlight what's happening in your community and highlight where the military is part of your community, I think that can go a long way in sort of rebuilding those connections. Okay.
No, that's great. Thank you. So you mentioned, we need to be flexible, which I really think that the workforce system, and that's why, Mark mentioned the local control is so very important because it is very different. Colorado Springs is very different from Denver than, Greeley or whatever. These are all places in Colorado because that's what I can talk about. So, right. So they're all very different. But being flexible. Well, what's interesting, we talk about what's happening federally and if we have layoffs or whatever. Well, a lot of times with companies, if they're going to lay off a lot of people, we get WARN notices, right? And so we're able to to moving, and when I say we, I mean all of you guys who are actually in it. I just happen to be a board member, but so you guys can move in very quickly and say, hey, okay, we're going to come in and help you guys find jobs and whatever. When this happens on maybe the federal side or government jobs or military, whatever it is, we don't get those sort of warn notices. So it's like, is this happening? We hear it might happen. Oh wait, now it's not going to happen. There might be a waiver. So how can we help? How can we prepare for that if we don't know?
No, it's a very good question. I think it's something we're trying to even figure out in the current environment. I mean, it's been a moving target in terms of DoD in general about civilian layoffs, and there's literally stories in the different news outlets today about this. That I think the DoD is shifting to probably a posture of trying to rely more on early retirements and sort of natural attrition versus a mass layoff, which is good news, because if we were going to see the cuts potentially in civilian workforce around the country, that could have been severely devastating for some places around the country. So I think we're moving in the right direction. But what you bring up is sort of the bigger challenge is missions change. And you can wake up one day and someone's made a decision in DC to move 400 people from one place to another. And suddenly you are losing a portion of your workforce. And there's some caps about what DoD can move without congressional approval, but there's also a lot of different ways they can do things. So I would urge you to make sure that you are talking to the folks who are plugged into that base so they know what's happening. And that's groups that are part of ADC. And in communities, they take on different sort of names and formations. They could be a chamber of commerce, they could be the military alliance, they could be the city manager. It just depends on where you are. But there's people who are plugged in, and you need to understand that, because I think that's one of the things sort of beyond my scare language about China. That's what we're also really worried about right now is dramatic mission changes. One of the things that's going to happen because of a reposturing towards the Pacific is we're most likely going to be moving a lot of assets from Europe to be in the Pacific region, in the West Coast. So there could be a lot of shift of missions, and that just means things could happen. And I'll raise the other thing that is on the table right now is BRAC again. We know the department is talking about it internally.
Quickly, can you explain?
Let me explain BRAC,
because we like to use a lot of acronyms, not only in the Department
How many people know
of Labor,
BRAC?
but
Raise your hand if you know the word, yeah. So base realignment and closure is the process that was created in the 1980s to basically allow DoD to close bases. It was a compromise because honestly, DoD could not close the base because congressional offices all stymied it and said, not in my community. Communities fought. So basically it was a way for an independent commission to review recommendations from DoD about which bases to close. And then they created this amazing process where they sent these recommendations to Congress, and Congress doesn't have to do a thing. They don't actually have to vote on it. They just have to let it sit there for 30 days and it becomes law. Congress loves things like that because no one wants to vote for a closure. So we've had 5 rounds of base realignment closure, closing hundreds, I think 400 major bases around the country over 3 decades. So there is a discussion about a potential another round of closure, because every time DoD talks about cost savings, they always say, well, we're going to close bases we don't need. And the reality is it's not going to be a quick savings for DoD to use BRAC to get money. This isn't like in the DOGE world, this is not going to be a quick win. And we're bringing that point across the DoD and Congress, but there still is a desire potentially to close bases or realign bases. So I think it's something you need to be thinking about, because if we do go through that, it can have positive impacts and negative impacts, because often if a base closes, another base grows. So it's something to be out there, but it is a traumatic experience for a community if you've ever gone through a base closure process, to lose an entire segment of your economy in a few years. And so I think that's going to be a really big thing for us to look out for coming up. The other thing I want to mention on the positive side, and we're talking about this literally right now while I'm sitting here, is there's also a lot of, DoD is one of the only entities in the federal government that's probably going to have a budget increase. So there's a lot of dollars, $750 billion. I mean, there's a lot of money that flows into our defense. Two big things happening that are opportunities: shipbuilding. And most of you probably don't have shipbuilding in your community per se, but you probably have part of the supply chain that is supporting shipbuilding. I would have you look into that, because there is going to be a gigantic investment in shipbuilding in the next 5 to 10 years, something we've never seen in a generation that's happening. And we do not have the workforce to support that. I was just sitting with folks from Connecticut where they're building submarines. They literally don't have enough people to, they're looking at people in 5th grade right now, because those are the people that they need to put into a pipeline ultimately to work on this. So think about shipbuilding. The second area is modernization. We are modernizing our nuclear forces. We are modernizing a lot of our technology and a lot of what we use in the warfighting realm, and that's going to mean a lot of dollars flowing into our defense supply chain. So all your defense contractors who do build stuff, build weapon systems, there's going to be money flowing there. There's going to be opportunity, and none of them have the workforce they need to support that. So those are the positive things and the positive opportunities I would see on the workforce side.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for that information. I would say, we definitely overlap. And so as much as we can continue or even work together more, whether it's on advocacy, I really appreciate ADC opening up on the workforce side. I mean, you guys have talked a lot in the past about, especially on the military spouse side, and that as far as workforce. And I know in the last couple years, we've done several panels. Several of us have done panels on, hey, this is what a workforce board is. A lot of the defense contractors have said, oh my gosh, we didn't even realize that. And so this is how you're able to go out there and work with the business services side and stuff like that. So I really appreciate you doing that. I appreciate you being here today, and I would love to continue working with you guys. And I think that you guys have a new advocacy thing as well that hopefully we can share it with our group as well.
Well, a couple things is we just put out an op-ed this morning talking about BRAC, so we'll share that.
Okay, great.
Because if you're interested in sort of understanding how to frame that issue and where it is right now, we're rolling out to National Security Starts at Home, which is our new tagline, but it's also a campaign talking about what we're sort of advocating on the Hill. And it's really about making sure we're continuing to invest in our defense communities. We're fortunate to have about $500 million in different programs that funnel into our defense communities to support infrastructure, planning, readiness. I mean, everything you can imagine. So there's big investments. We're making sure those investments continue, because I think they also support the workforce side. And so the more we can think about how to use our voice and in supporting what you do and vice versa, I think that's going to be important as we move in the future.
Great, awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming over here across the river today, and good luck with your conference as well. Thank you.
Thank you.